Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thank you very much for making this proposition the central element of this whole discussion this morning. And I think it really is quite relevant. And speaking as the first ostrich on this side of the panel, this is not designed to be a critique of Lawson's paper, but really to strike at the heart of the proposition, which is, are these measures obsolete or are they not? Because many of the things that Lawson has said in the paper, and I encourage you to read it, are very interesting and provocative. I'm not sure that they answer all the questions, but I think that they take us a long way in that reflection. Having said that, as to the proposition, I start from the other evening when I was watching the television along with many of you, I'm sure, and watching Alexandre Bidalot win the first gold for Canada. That was not a rational moment. That was an emotional moment. That was a moment that brought us together as Canadians. And everybody felt it. I don't care where you were or who you were with. You felt a sense of pride. You felt a sense of ownership. I feel the same way about the broadcasting system. I think you do too. And the reason for that is because we know that it's this intangible element that holds us together, that defines us, that gives us a sense of who we are, who we were, who we want to be, and where we're going. So the proposition, to me, speaks very much to that core issue of the Canadian concept of a broadcasting system historically, in the present tense, and in the future. And what do we need to maintain the Canadian identity, Canadian sovereignty, a place for Canadian cultural expression, a place for voices to get access to audiences here and abroad as well. And yes, it has been through regulation. It has been through policy and regulation articulated on the federal level, but also arguably on the provincial level as well to assist in the production elements and assist in production instruments. I believe that the Broadcasting Act provides the Commission with tremendous opportunity to exercise leadership. Some leadership which has been taken, other leadership which still has to be taken, in my view. Many of the areas that we've talked about, that Trina talked about this morning, that Lawson has talked about, and that we continue to talk about are places where I believe the Commission can exercise some leadership and do some things on its own, yes, incrementally, Lawson, because I oftentimes believe that it's not by trying to put everything on the table that you resolve everything. I think sometimes you find it much more useful to take one thing in its context and try to deal with it and move it ahead. And at the end of the day, you might move things more to the positive than to the negative in that view than trying to get your arms around everything and suddenly dissolving the whole as opposed to improving the whole. So leadership, from my perspective, starts with the Commission, and I think that what we saw in the last couple of months in terms of the debates, for all of the hostilities that were in those debates, was nonetheless a very positive outcome, and something that as Canadians, again, we should be proud of. We're able to have these discussions. Because as many people say, between anarchy and organized discussion, there's something called argument in between. And it's argument that brings us to conclusions that oftentimes are solutions. It's not just authority setting down a rule, setting down a way. So going forward, in terms of what we need to do, I think that we need to look at incremental solutions. I think that we need to look at the room the Commission has as a regulatory authority to assume the role to supervise and regulate in a fuller sense. And I also think that we have to look to the federal government and their counterparts provincially to come together in a more unified way of saying, how important is this to us as Canadians? That we have a place where creative expression is available, where it can be supported. Because we know that market forces alone won't make it happen. That's an absolutely clear conclusion that I don't think anybody can dismiss. And I happen to believe that history is on our side. I happen to believe that history is on our side because people, be it in whichever frame of reference they find themselves, they seem to migrate more to an aggregation model than a disaggregation model. And by that, what do I mean? I mean quite simply that people like to see things organized in a way that is friendly, that is price sensitive, and that appeals to what they are looking for or what their interests are, as opposed to this random access way of looking at the world. If I were given access to a warehouse of content, I'm not sure I'd walk out with anything that I really want or that I actually like. As opposed to, if I go to an aggregator, which is true in fashion, which is true in the automotive sector, in the technology sector, and clearly in the entertainment sector, I find more often than not things that are appealing to me. So disaggregation, albeit with the push of technology moving us towards that, I don't think is going to rule the roost, and I don't think is going to carry the day, because I think consumers will continue to look for aggregation models to satisfy themselves. And I believe that within the framework of the Act as it is, there is place for the Commission to exercise an aggregation model upgrade over what we have. I'll close with these remarks, Mr. Chair, before you flash me in the eyes with that.
You're safe.
Having looked at the system since leaving the CAB with a bit of a different perspective, it's given me the opportunity to focus on some things that, frankly, I hadn't seen very well or very clearly. And I'm not suggesting that I see it all clearly now either. But I'll say this much. First of all, my primary profession now is achieving, or hopefully achieving someday, the status of a mediocre songwriter and promoter. Songwriter and performer of rock music. And I'm a far cry from that achievement. But what it's given me the opportunity to do is to think about where we're at in terms of what we're actually accomplishing in the way of a system that's designed to entertain Canadians. And there's tremendous Canadian content out there, but for all of the access that is available to independent songwriters and performers by way of the new technology platforms, there are few success stories. I'll state it differently. There are not enough to measure up to the talent that's out there. And somehow we have to figure out a way to ensure that those creative voices continue to get a push that the market forces alone do not offer them. And that's what I think the future is all about, is reinventing the way, not to push-pull in the technology sense, but to push Canadian creative excellence to the forefront and make that, I was hoping you wouldn't get to that.
Well, you said you were going to wrap up, but then you started to go on.
I'm about to.
Sorry, I killed your big finish. I apologize. Judges can take that into account. Are you sure?
Yeah, thank you.
Judges, note the grace under pressure there. I thought you did a job, given that I interrupted. Judges, can we see your scores, please? Remember, oh, that's a nice 8. That's an 8. An 8 and a 7.
5. Oh, not engaged.
Sorry, 5 because of what?
The debate was not engaged.
Okay. Thank you. Now.
Who invited him?
I don't know. That's part of it, Glenn. You know, these things happen. All right, now we are turning back to. Now
brutal,
you'll
but
get
it's
a
true.
chance. You'll get a chance to get back. Maybe it was your costume, actually. We will now turn back to Team Chicken Little. Let me just reset the clock here, Michael.
You have 3 minutes left.
All right.